Welcome to another segment of Chat Time. Today I have such a huge privilege to introduce my guest. Her name is Skye Bennett, and she's worked in project and program management since 2008, where she accidentally fell into project management and never left. She's worked in projects across higher education, the not-for-profit sector, state and local government, as well as the arts and cultural sector, delivering projects and programs for brands, including the University of South Australia, Deakin University, Museum Victoria, the Victorian Department of Health and Treasury and Finance. Skye is what she calls a generalist, and I can really relate to that term, having had this sort of feeling myself. And she draws on a range of disciplines in her management of her teams, her projects, including human-centered design, communications, change, as well as her undergraduate training in psychology. She is passionate about learning and adding new and unique skills and approaches to her PM toolkit. Please welcome my very special guest, Skye Bennett. Hi, Skye. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very, very excited about our chat today. So Skye, and in the introduction, I did mention that you are also an accidental project manager. And it's funny because there seem to be so many of us out there and more people I speak to. And if you go back to the chat time segments, you'll find that seems to be the common theme. And I haven't necessarily gone out looking for all of us accidental project or program managers. But I'd love to hear about how you got into projects.
Yes, so I'm very much the accidental project manager. So I first got into projects around about 2008. So I had being a generalist, as you've mentioned, I had quite a unconventional sort of career path up until that point. I had worked in a whole lot of different areas, experimented with different jobs. I'd studied psychology, as you mentioned, and then also studied social work. And then also went on to do a BA and an MA as well, and another master's subsequently after that. But it was around 2008, and I was offered a role in the university sector in the University of South Australia, and it was working on an international education program. I had before that worked for about 4 or 5 years throughout Asia. I was an English teacher, or English as a second language teacher. So I had traveled quite a lot, and I had lived and worked overseas in the capacity as an English teacher. And there was a sort of a job opportunity going at the university, and I just had the right mix of skills, experience, mindset, and approach that kind of really gelled well with the job. And the job was essentially project management. And I ended up staying in that job for about, I think it was about 8 or 9 years. So I kind of was a bit of a functional manager. I managed a university-wide international education and experience program. And then under that, I also had a whole host of annual projects that I used to roll out every year over the course of those 8 years. And so I was really project managing lots of different projects. I didn't really realize it at the time that it was kind of I didn't really know what a project manager did or what the job entailed.
Yeah.
I just kind of fell into it, and it just kind of made sense to me. I really worked in a kind of intuitive way. I was a little bit self-taught at the time, picking up different skills from learning from others and doing a few different sort of project management micro credentials, I guess you'd call them at the time. But I very much just fell into it, and I loved it. I loved the being able to bring in my sort of generalist background from lots of different areas and sort of just bring in really disparate knowledge and skills from lots of different domains, and I could kind of bring it all into this job. And I never left. I'm still doing project management today.
I love that. And I think that's the thing about generalists. I know I've had that experience of a generalist to begin with, but actually these days I see that as being a specialist skill in itself, because let's face it, on a project team, you have such an array of different personality types, different levels of experience, people who have had, different connections with different industries. So having that generalist skill and being able to pull off all of those from, I guess, that big toolkit actually does play to your strengths. It definitely helps in a lot of ways. So thank you. And so can you share with us what your career high and low potentially were or are?
Yes. Gosh, I was thinking a lot about this question before what sort of what my highlights and my lowlights throughout my career. So I think I'd have to say a high was probably during that time, that first project management job that I had. So that was between 2008 and sort of the following 8 years. One of the highs was I worked on a project, and I saw a real need for a service within that community of students. I did a lot of then I didn't realize it was called co-design at the time, but the way I worked was that I really co-designed projects with our audience, which was students, university students, and using a lot of co-design methodology, focus groups, prototyping and testing. It just kind of made sense to me. So that's kind of how I created projects at the time, and services and products. So I worked on a project. I saw a real need, and the students were saying to me, there's a real need for us to have a service in our community that we don't have. So I kind of co-designed this program, I guess I'd call it a service, with the students, and then rolled it out. It was sort of, I guess, a project. Rolled it out over, I think it was like a 6-month period or something like that. And then kind of handed it over to the students to then continue the execution of and the sort of management of the program for the rest of the time. We ended up winning an award for that project, which I was really surprised by. I kind of often think about that experience as like a real high. So creating something of value that was sustainable, that their audience or the end user really needed and wanted and were inspired to carry it forward. So it feels really successful. And when I think about that, it was a small project, but it was just, it was really embraced by the students, and it met a real need. So anyway, we won an award. I think it was around 2011. It was the Governor of South Australia Multicultural Award for 2011. And I kind of feel like that's a real highlight, because even though it's being a small project, I still see it as like a really great success. It impacted the lives of and the experiences of our students, and it was a
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. It's not really about the size, is it? And I think every project manager or project team go into it because they want to solve a pain point. They want to be able to see the improvements. And that's why we sort of will get excited about it at the beginning. But I think for some project teams, the reason that they don't get that adoption at the end, and is something that I go on about all the time. It's about understanding what that need or pain point is to begin with. And then, of course, people will want to co-create with you because you're helping to solve their problem, or you're helping to support their needs. So, and then you'll get a lot more buy-in. And when you're handing things over, well, they've been part of this production. Of course, they would feel a sense of ownership and a sense of pride as well. So, what a terrific outcome! Yeah. And you get to see the benefits on the ground, which is not what all project teams have the opportunity of seeing at times. So that would be amazing.
Yes, that's true. And I still have the award behind me in my bookshelf.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I can see it there. I love it. Okay, so on the flip side, I feel like I should always ask this question in reverse. What would be the lows? And you know what? I always say you can't always have good. You need to have not so good, so then you learn to be better. So it's actually also just an opportunity. But what would be one of those standout-ish, and I hope you can see it as an opportunity, lows for you?
Yeah, I think a low probably was a couple of years ago. I was working on a project in the not-for-profit sector. So I was working in the disability sector at the time. And I had actually in a previous career iteration worked in the disability sector. So I again fell into that job because I'd had experience of working with that community group. So I was working on, or the project manager of a research project that was supposed to be around about an 18-month long period. And I put an enormous amount of work, as did the team, into the design of this project because I was quite passionate about the organisation and the vision for the project, what we're trying to achieve. And really, we took a co-design approach for that project as well. So worked alongside our end users or our clients, our customers, to create the best sort of possible project and co-design deliverables and stuff like that. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the project was shelved.
Oh.
So it was cancelled purely because we, in order to execute. It was a lot of data collection, which we did as the sort of through the execution phase. So in order to qualitative data, so in order to collect the data, we did it as a face-to-face methodology, to be able to collect meaningful data from the people who we were engaging with. And we just had no workaround around that. So unfortunately, the project was shelved at a really critical time because we had some really great ambitious plans to do stuff. And because COVID just went on for basically 2 years, it became unsustainable. So we delivered, I think it was about 40% thereabouts of the project. So, and it did win an award as well.
Oh, really?
So that was a bit of a high. That project also won an award, social policy and co-design way of working as well. But sadly, we didn't get to see it through to the end just because it was unsustainable to sort of keep. Well, there was no other option, so it was
fair enough.
Cancelled, and that was a little bit demoralizing for me and the team after putting so much work into.
Of course. But it's, I guess it's one of those things that you just can't fight, can you? There's not much you can do about it. But having won the award again, and it's interesting to see that you've used the same techniques. You've co-created with your audience. You've really understood their pain point, and you're working together. It goes to show, well, you have 100% strike rate on that front. It seems when you get to co-create with your stakeholders. Yes. These are the benefits. Not only do we win awards, but we actually deliver a product that means something. It's valued to our stakeholders and to the team.
Yes, and I think I was reflecting on the title of the submission for the award. It was sort of referencing how the project was designed and executed. And so the title of the submission was called Nothing About Us Without Us. So it's about, with projects, it's I kind of sort of running a parallel to projects. It's almost like designing and delivering and executing projects with people, not for them or to them.
I mean, I'm a huge advocate of that. If you don't understand, and you don't, even when you are given a project where your stakeholders may not be as keen on it as perhaps you are or the directive has been, there are still ways we can bring our audience to the party. There are still ways we can solve a particular pain point that they would have related to the thing that we're meant to be delivering, and that's really the best way to do it. Find some value for everybody involved.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, those are amazing careers. Those two pictures just paint such a wonderful image of your career and what you've brought to it. And I guess your attitude towards your teams and your attitude towards how you want to deliver and the empowerment that you want to give to your teams. And obviously the awards are just testament to that. But I think, and it really plays really well into the topic of conversation for today, which is centered around communication. I know in the time I've known you, something that has really stood out to me is you, not only are you passionate about communication, but you're passionate about who you're communicating with, the ways in which you communicate. You're actually very, very active on that front. I know that you're always posting about all of these different forums that you're involved in, whether it's not-for-profit or whether it's just community-based opportunities and things where you're really helping to shine a light on communication and how empowering it can be when we empower other people. I know that that's something that's always been, a draw card when I want to speak to you. It's so nice to be involved in that energy. And so I'd love you to share with our audience, some of these amazing things that you're always involved in that obviously shapes your career. It shapes the way in which you give back to your teams as well, and the kind of relationships you have.
Yeah. Oh, it really does. So I'll preface with all the sort of various things that I do with, I think as a generalist, well, this is a quality I have, and I kind of feel like maybe a lot of generalists might have this, is that I'm really passionate about learning. Like I love learning new things, new domain areas. So I kind of sort of cut across different things because I'm really passionate about learning. And that kind of also goes outside of the realm of my, I guess my kind of day job or my profession, in all the extracurricular stuff that I do, because I really love engaging with other communities, diversity of thinking, diversity of domain expertise and knowledge, and what I can learn from that. So some of the stuff that I do outside of sort of my project management work, but I bring a lot of value to my project management work, like you said, through my involvement
Well,
in
you're the same person, so of course it will transition and you'll carry that through.
yeah. So I do a lot of work within the Toastmasters community. So I'm a passionate Toastmaster, and I really fell into that. I was actually really intrigued by Toastmasters. I never really knew what happened in a Toastmasters meeting, and then it was during COVID a couple of years ago that I got involved in Toastmasters, and just saw the value that communication brings to my work. On so many levels. I've gained so much value out of that. So I'm very passionate about Toastmasters and encourage everyone to do it. It's not as scary as one thinks. I was admittedly quite reticent about joining a meeting, but found a very inclusive space where like-minded people is very supportive. So
I can attest to that too, actually. So
I bring a lot of sort of approaches in my Toastmasters to my work, and in talking and engaging with diverse people and in different domain areas and on different projects. I'm also involved in some work through a community called I Am Remarkable. So it's a Google initiative, and I'm a facilitator for this initiative. And we run workshops, and they're public workshops on behalf of Google on self-promotion. So really challenging perceptions of self-promotion, directed particularly at women and underrepresented groups, and equipping people with the skills to authentically self-promote and really enable them for their personality to really shine through in an authentic way that empowers themselves and empowers each other. So I do quite a bit of facilitation on that program. And then I also bring the thinking of the content that I deliver. I bring that back to my work with my teams as well.
yeah.
So I kind of think of all these different things that I do. It looks a bit like a patchwork in some ways, but it all adds value to my work.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually don't see it as a patchwork at all. I can just see how those skills, because obviously on projects, you're limited by time, by different people's different views and opinions, and just other conflicting priorities, I suppose. And when you know how to engage people in a short period of time, get somebody's attention, that is an amazing and valuable skill to be able to getting everybody to see eye on something, or opening up the channels of communication. That's the first thing. And I suppose that's something that you would get from your Toastmasters. But then the I Am Remarkable program is exactly that as well, where when there are so many voices on our project teams or even in our stakeholder groups which are underrepresented because either they are a woman or either because they feel like they've never been able to represent themselves for various reasons. But by hearing some of that input actually gets you to develop a much better solution and a much more value-added solution that people actually want. So it doesn't feel like patchwork at all. I guess the topic is that you're passionate about people and communication. So you've probably sought that out in all sorts of different areas that you can.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. I think the common thread running through the patchwork is people and communication. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I've heard this a lot from various people, but to see how it's transformed in your life and how you're actively doing something about it is a great insight for people to see where they can get that skill, where they can develop it, what they can do with it, and how they can nurture it really.
Yes.
Excellent. So I guess we're talking about communication, and I know the topic of good communication comes up a lot. But I'd love to know, particularly given your diversity, as a generalist, as you've said, and across various fields and things, what do you see as being good communication particularly in a team environment? What does that look like to you?
Oh, good communication. So in a team environment, I think it's really underpinning good communication, I think, are a couple of really core foundational elements. without these, I kind of feel like communication might be a little bit fraught. And this is in a team context. So the first thing is trust. Without trust, I think it can be really hard to have open and authentic communication, and to be able to enable conditions for everyone in the room to be empowered to air their views, give their input, bring up new ideas, ask questions, challenge questions. So trust is really important. And in that, I think also conditions of psychological safety, and I guess that's kind of, entwined with trust as well. I think those two, I think those two conditions are vital for open communication. I know there's a lot of sort of talk about this, psychological safety needed for innovation. There's a lot of research around showing that diverse teams that trust each other and feel safe to air their views are more innovative. And there's a lot of that research sort of published with data that confirms that. But I think for me, open communication is really, underpinned by psychological safety and trust in each other, honesty, authenticity. So I think those core values really underpin and kind of define what open communication is. I think it's really important for communication to be not defined by rank, but almost like who has the best ideas. So I was in a really great webinar the other day through another community that I'm part of, which is called SheEO, entrepreneurial community. So I was in a really great webinar and we were talking about communication, and the speaker was saying, sort of referencing in Indigenous cultures of where they were based, there's this notion of the leader or the speaker is the person who has the most amount of kind of knowledge in a domain or value to add in a given context. So it's irrespective of rank. So it's almost like communication is defined by, and I guess also leadership in some sense of, and so the distributed leadership idea of that leadership and communication is defined by, or not defined, but guided by who kind of has some really great ideas and value to add in this context. Like everyone does, and everyone brings diversity thinking, but it's kind of like communication is guided by, going back to the question, communication is guided by, who has great ideas and who has some great input to give. And it's not about necessarily about rank at all. It's about sort of more of a horizontal, open way of communicating.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I just wanted to dive into that element of trust a little bit more, I mean, it kind of, we expect that when there is trust, people will want to contribute and want to actively communicate. But how do you build that trust? How do you develop that trust? Because trust is not something that people will give you instantly. So how do you get to develop it and then nurture it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really important to, and you're right, your trust needs to be developed. It's not sort of granted automatically. But I think it's really important to connect with people on a really sort of human level. It sounds quite simple, and I'll give an example of something that I did on a project to connect with some of my diverse stakeholder groups. So to enable communication. So I was working on a project. It was a government organizational transformation project, and it was a program actually. And I was working in a PMO function, sort of governance function. So I was working with a lot of cross-functional teams and IT and people and culture and HR and payroll systems. It was sort of a broad spectrum of disciplines. And there was a lot of, so I was involved in very much the sort of reporting, weekly reporting, daily reporting sort of cadence cycle across multiple projects. Came in to this project from outside of the sector as well. So I'd come in from outside of government.
These don't normally stack up well for trust.
I was a generalist. I am a generalist. I was working with technical specialists who were really sort of steeped in sort of their domains. And I was finding the sort of, to break through that barrier of trust and build relationship really quickly to enable the conditions whereby the project teams trusted me to give authentic, sort of real and accurate reports
Yes.
in a way that really acknowledge that there are risks and there are issues and we'll mitigate them. And it's not about right or wrong or good or bad. It's just about, you know, managing the project in the best way possible. So anyway, what I did was, it was such a simple thing. I was reflecting on this last night, and I've not actually thought about this until this conversation. I established a walking group.
Oh.
So we were working in this sort of high rise in the middle of Melbourne CBD. I don't know how many floors. It was, I don't know, like 80 or 90. It was massive. Anyway.
Okay.
So I started this walking club, and I did it I think I ran it a few times a week, and I invited all of my project stakeholders. And then
Great, amazing idea.
and I called it, because we didn't have a lot of time to go out into the park and come back. It was a super busy project. I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'll set up this walking club, but instead of walking out in parks, we'll basically walk the stairs of the building, the flights of the building. So
oh, wow. Do you get to speak by the end of this at all? So.
Yeah, it was a challenge, that's for sure. Started on the bottom of the building and basically just walked up the flight of I think it was the fire exit. But anyway, we walked up the flights of stairs up to as far as we could go, and we encouraged each other on because it was pretty epic in terms of fitness. And then we walked back down again. We didn't talk about the project. I was leading it, I guess. I call myself the leader of the group. And it was a whole lot of diverse people would just get on board and come and do the Step Up Club, the walking group. And we wouldn't talk at all about the project. We'd just sort of get to know each other. And, you know, where we come from, where we worked before, our families, our hobbies, our extracurricular stuff, and just sort of connecting with each other. So I did this for a period of time. I can't recall, but there was this bit of a shift. And I noticed in my reporting meetings, so there's some of the people who came on the walking group. I also had weekly, you know, sort of reporting meetings and cycles where we had to go through the risks and issues and updating various aspects of their milestone plans and etc. And I noticed that there was a shift, and I kind of feel like it was like we started to trust each other because they got to know me as a person, and I got to know them as people too. And I know it's a kind of a weird example, but it really changed the way that I worked with the project teams. And I know when I finished up in that project, and I remember all the different project teams coming together, and we had a little speech and I said goodbye. And I remember having the most amazing, you know, really heartfelt feedback from the project team. How great it was to work together. And I felt the same too. I really enjoyed working with them. So going back to your question around, you know, how do you create the conditions for trust? I think it's about really connecting on a person-to-person level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that is such a huge thing for me too, having come from being a consultant and in a similar environment that you're talking about, where you are the stranger, you know, who is going to trust you. And as you say, the walking group is such a small thing, but people can't connect to a spreadsheet, you know, or people can't connect to plans or a risk. It's a problem to solve perhaps, you know, but unless you're actively working out how we're going to build a raft or something, it's very hard to connect with people on that level. But something as simple as this, either people who have always been interested in walking or maybe see it as a challenge or something, fitness or something else to do, they will gravitate. And it's much harder to ignore somebody or not to turn up for somebody or not to be present for somebody when you know them and when you have that connection, because you feel as though you're sitting at a coffee shop with somebody and someone just picks up a paper when, you know, there's somebody else with them, a guest with them. And that's for exactly that reason. It develops that connection, and then it actually does the opposite. You want to help that person when you can. You know, you want to listen to them, and you probably want to nudge the person beside you who isn't listening to them to encourage them to listen too. So, and I guess to the point of trust, perhaps it's not developing trust immediately, but you're going to speed up that process by an enormous amount, because people are seeing that you're actively taking an interest in them, in something outside of the project. You see them as a person as opposed to just another thing that you need to do on your checklist. So I love the idea of a working group. I'm definitely going to suggest that as something to do for my teams, you know, for the people I train. So and that's a thing, like, you can be as creative. It can be a coffee. There obviously they have trivia nights and things like that. But I think some of those things, it comes back to what you said at the beginning. You have to understand who your audience is, and you have to understand what their pain point or their need is. If you're doing a trivia night or a day and nobody else has interest in that topic, then you're forcing people to show up, and then it kind of it defeats the purpose of what you're trying to achieve. It's about it's that co-creation that you were speaking about, you know, and inviting them if they're interested, and if they're not, maybe you can pick something else. So
Yeah.
I love it. I really love it.
And I think that also sort of building that rapport and that environment of trust and, you know, authenticity and openness, it also helps in problem solving, in really getting to the root cause of problems. So I know through the process of the walking group and getting to know some of the project teams, I found out that I would not have found this out otherwise. Well, I probably would have, in fact, but it probably would have taken me a lot longer to sort of come to the realization that there was a lot of pain points with the project teams. So I'm like, oh, how can I help you with your pain points? And they didn't have access to some information that they needed, and a whole sort of a range of things. So it really sort of almost accelerated my understanding of their experiences and their challenges and their pain points. So it's helping with that sort of root cause analysis in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Thank you. And then I guess I would love to be on your team, by the way, just because it sounds like such a nurturing environment, an empowering environment, and an encouraging environment too. But as we know, on projects or programs, we're not the end of the line. So, and I guess I know we've spoken about this before, but around the challenge of, do you get to what all the great things that you're creating for your teams? What happens when the leadership you report to don't see it the same way, or they're not necessarily not agreeing with you, but it's just not the way that they operate. They're probably doing it unconsciously, where they're not really giving people the space all the time. Have you experienced that, and what do you do about it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely more of a maybe nurturing kind of leader or servant leader. And that's sort of how I like to work with my teams. I'm really open and authentic and transparent, and show my weaknesses, because I think that's kind of important to role model that as well. Make an environment where it's okay to fail. Like, that's okay. It's experimentation. It's sort of not failure. It's sort of learning.
And it's another opportunity of developing that trust.
Yeah.
People know they can do it too.
But I know, you know, I've worked in certain different contexts throughout my career where management has had a radically different approach, particularly environments where there's a really low sort of appetite or tolerance for risk. You kind of butt against, sort of there's a bit of friction there. And, you know, I think I don't like a clear answer to the question. Like, I'm still working through that. It's an evolving piece. But I think it's really important to, I guess, advocacy for the team is really important. But then also, so advocating for the team, but then also influencing upwards as well. It's challenging when there's a cultural divide, or a sort of a mindset divide. Is really challenging. I think sort of something that I use to try and work through that is, and I kind of guess it goes back to my sort of interests in psychology and human behavior, and then also human-centered design as well, is to really try and put myself into the the shoes, if you like, of the other party. So really trying to empathize with, you know, the perspectives of leadership, even though that it may be at odds with my approach. Trying to really take that what's in it for them kind of perspective on things.
Yes, but it's going back to their need or their pain point as well, which dictates what actions they take.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, their pain points will be quite different perhaps to mine, and mine may be different to my team, and so on. But I guess trying to get that understanding of what is the point of friction, and what are the pain points, and what I can do to alleviate those pain points.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress.
Look, if you had given me one answer that just solves the problem, well, that's it, where we're done and you can just rule projects from here on. But the reason I asked the question is because I think it's a reality for anybody who has this way of leading, where we perhaps get to influence that you know, creating that right environment for our teams, but we don't necessarily, we have an opportunity to influence to some extent, but in some environments it doesn't go very far, you know, and it's not the majority. So we don't really get to change it. So I know it's something that I think people will face over and over, because we're humans, we're always going to be different, and people are going to be driven in different ways too. And so I think that's probably the reason why we will probably never truly solve the problem. But I think I love the fact that you're talking about how you try and shed a light on your team and advocate for them. I think other things that I've tried in my career as well, and I still recommend this for the teams that I train, is to create, I guess, if you nominate a particular person who you believe is quite valuable and should be heard, you can either put them as, or send them off to the meeting, and they are your representative. So there is no choice, and you make sure you've set up the situation where all the stakeholders there have to listen to this person, because it's in their best interest, right? They have a vested interest to do that, and so it gives them that opportunity for a stage where it's an uninterrupted stage and there are no judgments, because they can only listen to that that thing. One of the ways that people try and do that is obviously having demos, you know, when they do demonstrations, or even training. If you get one of your team members to run the training, the stakeholders have to listen, because this is their opportunity to understand how to use the product once everybody's left. So, you know, just trying to take yourself out of it, because I know even for me, people will come straight to you. They won't listen to anybody else, you know. So what you say is valuable, everybody else is, because of that rank mentality, is not as valuable. So sometimes it just pays to take yourself out of it and then give other people that opportunity to be heard. But yeah, I mean, and I guess the reason I want to shine a light on it is for the audience to understand that it's a problem that everybody faces, you know, and if anybody is in that position of influence, maybe take that into consideration when you do have your teams under you. What kind of environment are you creating? Are you supporting them to be able to give you valuable information? Because if your teams are able to do that, you're going to get a valuable solution and product at the end of your projects or your programs of work. So as is the case with your two co-created projects, you know, where an award came out of it, but people really appreciated the product. So, and that's whether it doesn't matter what rank you're in, or what position you hold, everybody wants the same thing. So
yes. And go back to your point about you know, empowering and enabling your teams by kind of giving them the opportunity to go as in forums that they ordinarily wouldn't be able to as you're sort of a delegate. I worked with a really great leader, and it was around that time when I worked on my first project, and she did exactly that, and had that approach for me. And there were opportunities where she would send me into very senior forums and enabled me to have an opportunity to have a voice, and really lifted me up. So, and when you were talking, I did reflect on that particular leader, and I think that was actually really quite pivotal to my success in a lot of ways, her leadership in that role.
Yeah, and I think, it's like what you were saying about the walking group. It's all those little things that have such a magnitude of effect on people's lives, people's opportunities, people's leadership, and what they then, I guess, the people that they turn into, and the leaders that they become at the end of it as well, or the people that they influence on their journey too. So, and I think that's the positive power of communication. When some of the things that you touched on is when you are able to put yourself in somebody else's situation simply by understanding what is their driver, what is their need or their pain point, then we can understand, well, there is more than just one perspective here, and it's not just my perspective. And it doesn't mean that they don't conflict at times, but at least you have an appreciation. So maybe you can come up with something which will be a working solution for both parties involved, So, yes, I could speak to you forever, Skye, but unfortunately, we will have to wrap it up because I think we're kind of out of time. But I really wanted to thank you so much for firstly saying yes to coming to chat with me, but to sharing some of your very, very valuable experiences and just tips on what people can do, and just knowing that a lot of what people face, or a lot of what you've talked about, is what the same sort of pain points that people face, and you've given some great strategies and techniques to be able to overcome some of those. So thank you again. I will provide the links to some of those communities that you've mentioned, if anybody is interested to follow those up as well, or I can let them get in contact with you. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.